Hi, everybody, and thanks for all those wonderful messages on the chat. It is so great to have you on this webinar. Kaylin and I, as you know, work at Institute for the Study of Adult Literacy at Penn State, and we have experience both implementing and providing professional development on IETs. So we're going to be really happy to talk to you about our experience and just some general ideas and information about the basics with IETs. Next slide, please. Whoops. So we have two main objectives for our webinar today. First, we're going to go through some essential steps for planning and implementing IETs, and we're going to talk about it specifically in the context of WIOA. And then we're going to talk throughout the presentation on ideas for building partnerships and that can support the IETs, and ways to address local system issues and some challenges that you might experience along the way of implementing your IETs. And now I'm going to turn it over to Kaylin, and she's going to get us started with nuts and bolts and the big picture.
Thank you, Carol. So today I want to start our discussion with some foundational information about integrated education and training, or IET. We're going to talk about different types of IET, including the IBEST model, which was designed for implementation in partnership with community colleges between adult basic education and workforce training programs. However, as we'll see on the next slide, there are some specific requirements from WIOA legislation that we need to pay attention to. To be on the same page, today we are going to specifically talk about IETs that meet the WIOA definitions that are on the slide. So we don't just take existing programs and activities and combine them. We look at data, we look at workforce needs of the area, we look at the educational needs of the potential workforce in the area. Where is there a good intersection? Is an IET a good way to address the needs? IET is an educational program. The adult education component is not just an afterthought. You'll see on the slide that there are 3 components that need to be offered concurrently for an IET to meet the WIOA requirements: adult education and literacy, workforce preparation, and workforce training. Programs must be part of a career pathway and have a single set of learning objectives. So for this particular section of the webinar, we're just going to look at a overarching nuts and bolts. As we progress through the webinar, you'll hear Carol give more detail about each of these elements that we're talking about here in the introduction. You'll see on the slide that there are 3 required components of IET as described in WIOA. The adult education activity, which can be one of the 8 allowable activities. Workforce preparation, which sometimes we might call employability skills, we might call them foundational skills, we might call them soft skills. But in general, it's using resources and information, working well with others, understanding systems, transition skills, and the kinds of things that people need to get a job, keep a job, and advance in a job. The third component of IET, of course, is the workforce training for a specific occupation, which must have a qualified trainer. WIOA describes those 10 types of acceptable trainings that are part of the Title I legislation. IET is required to be an integrated activity, which means, as described in WIOA, services must be provided concurrently and contextually, such that within the overall scope of the IET, the adult education literacy activities, workforce preparation, and workforce training are each of sufficient intensity and quality and based on the most rigorous research available, which generally we describe with the college and career readiness standards or any standards that your state aligns to, particularly with respect to improving reading, writing, mathematics, and English proficiency of eligible individuals. The activities must occur simultaneously and use occupationally relevant instructional materials. Integrated education and training programs are required to have a single set of learning objectives that identify each of the components, the specific adult education content, the workforce preparation activities, and the workforce training competencies, and they are required to organize in a functional manner. So IET, what does it take? It's usually not a linear process. You have to connect the dots of a lot of moving parts. So on the screen, you'll see the training, the deficiencies of our population, the partners, the systems thinking, the planning, and the patience and time that are all required for the development, implementation, and sustainability of an IET program. Carol will be talking to each of those a little bit later in our presentation. So we're going to take a little bit of a closer look at these questions and more when it comes through partners as we go on. But IETs take many partners and a lot of planning to occur before you can even begin. You need to give yourself ample time and make sure you know the answers to these questions before you begin. Collaboration brings unexpected challenges and opportunities. Internal partners do not necessarily make the work easier than external partners. So the questions on the screen are the ones that you need to think about before you even plan instruction or may even think about who your training provider partner is going to be. So working with workforce development partners, we need to ensure that the IET aligns with state and local WIOA plans. If you have not read your state or local plan, I would suggest you do that so that you become familiar with what the expectations of Title II adult education are, as well as the career pathways that are described in those plans. The recruitment strategies that you will require to make sure that you have the right people that are interested in your IET, understanding the local labor market, what are the in-demand jobs, what are the high priority occupations, and are there defined career paths for these jobs in your region? And lastly, we'll want to ensure that all opportunities for co-enrollment across core WIOA programs and other WIOA partners are examined, being sure that all of the barriers that we can address through these programs are taken into consideration. It's important to realize that IET programs are job-led and not training-led. For example, we want to make sure that when students complete the IET, the training portion of the IET, as well as the adult ed portion, which again are happening simultaneously, that there will be jobs available to them that they would interview for and show the qualifications that they've gotten through the IET. So as you're thinking, that's where you need to begin your thinking. What are the jobs that are available in my location, in my community, in my region, that an IET might be the correct answer as the educational intervention. So at this point, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Carol, who will be describing these elements in much more detail for you. Carol?
Yep. Hi. So Kaylin mentioned, some really critical things about IETs that I just want to emphasize. They take a lot of upfront planning. You just don't have jobs and then you know what jobs you're going to be doing the IET for, and then in even a month get your IT up and running. In our experience, we like to advise people to at least take 6 months to plan your IETs. And you'll see as I go through the slides why it might take that much time. And as Kaylin said too, they have a lot of moving parts. I like to say the stars have to align in order to be able to get your IET up and running. At least that's been our experience. Next slide, please. So, here are things that you really need to settle about your IET before you begin. And I want to say, one thing, right at the get-go, IETs are really being driven, in my opinion, for the most part, by the adult education field. We have gotten the fundings to do IETs. We have legislation that says that IETs are allowable. If we're running IELCE programs, they're required. In many states, they're required. But it's not always a given that you're going to need to do an IET. The IET is done for very, very specific reasons. And just because we have funding or a grant to do them, or even just because we're required, it doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily like a given that an IET is easy to develop and plan. And again, I'll go through some reasons why that might be. So you have to really, when you start, you have to know who is your target population? Who are you planning the IET for? And when you're starting with jobs in a career pathway, who are the potential students that are going to be coming into the IET, or that you're going to be recruiting or enrolling in the IET? And I'll give you an example of something, a situation that happened to us at Penn State when we were starting to develop an IET, that I think is really a good case in point for, the need to think closely and really be thoughtful about your target population. We were working with a workforce partner that had funding from a dislocated worker training grant that they got. And they wanted to do IETs for the training because they thought it was a really great idea. And I also want to say, I think IETs are a really good intervention and educational strategy when they make sense to do them. So we worked with them to do the IET, and we had jobs. There were some CNC training jobs that were needed, and we had a training partner. And we began to meet with the training partner, and we set a time, and we worked to align our curriculum, and we're ready to go and started recruiting, going through the dislocated workers that were interested in the jobs, and doing other kinds of recruiting in our community to find people for this training. And there wasn't anybody that had a basic skill need. So, when we did our testing, they were all way too high for an IET. So it's a really great example of in my opinion, of that you need to know right at the get-go, do you have a target population that is ready for this IET? And just because there's jobs and a training partner, it's not necessarily the case that you might have people that are need the training, or are ready for the training, or that are interested in the training. So you may need to do some recruitment as well. You have to think about what occupational skills courses that are needed for the training, and you have to find, as Kaylin said, a partner that you can work with for the training. You need to think about the certifications that are associated with the training. Are they employer recognized? Sometimes you might have a training that requires a GED, and you have people who are interested in the IET and need the IET, but they don't have the GED, so that needs to be factored into your planning. You need to know about what the basic skills thresholds are, or the language requirements. Sometimes a bridge course is a more appropriate training to do than the IET, because it's possible that you could have folks who are at a lower level than the threshold that is needed for the training. You have to know about what competencies are required. What are they going to have to do at the end of the course? Is there a grade level that they have to pass or demonstrate at the end, or some kind of test or license, or you know, different competencies. So you have to do a lot of understanding what that occupational skills course is. And then IETs, one thing that's really critical is that you should only do an IET if your students cannot succeed in the occupational training because they don't have the basic skills that they need or the language skills that they need. And then will your basic skills or your language component, will it actually help them to succeed in the course? Next slide, please. There's also a lot of quick questions that you need to think about when you're working with your workforce development and your training partners. You need to look at the jobs that are available and what are the specific training requirements for this, the jobs that you're training for. Are there certifications that you're going to have to find training that has a specific certification? Does your state require certifications associated with the IETs? This idea about the, you know, whether you do the training in a classroom or whether you do it on the job or whether you do a workforce employer training is really, you know, related to what the need is in your community. And again, it's this idea that if you start with the jobs and you have a training provider, you want to decide where's the best place or format to do the training. Are you going to be working at a community college to do the training, or are you going to do the training on the job with the employer? Is it going to be a training that is for a variety of employers that meets across their needs? And you have to do that kind of thinking. If you're being funded with Title II funds, they have to be on the approved provider list. You may be funding the IET with your own title. Did I say Title II funds? I think I mixed myself up. If you're funding it with Title I funds, they have to be on the IET or the approved provider training list, and if the ITA list, that's what I'm thinking. And then you might be also getting other grant sources to do the funding. Next slide, please. So this is a tool that we developed to kind of help you map the different requirements of a course and help you figure out whether an IET is really the appropriate intervention in order to work with your workforce. You just identify the career path and what jobs are associated with it, what certifications are needed, are they employer recognized? You want to, you know, list your basic skills thresholds or language requirements, whether or not they need experience in the field before they can enroll in the training, what kinds of other credentials they might need, like a GED, what kind of testing is required, do they have to actually prove that they can do something, is there a lab requirement, is there some kind of credentialing or certification related to the IET? And I hope you can see it, figuring all this out is one of the reasons why it takes, you know, 6 months to get all the planning done. It can take that long. Next slide, please. As adult educators, I think, you know, we're pretty familiar with contextualized curriculum and why it's really important to have this as part of an IET. You know, it's critical that we are developing the basic skills or the language part of the IET so that our students can understand and succeed in the occupational skills training. So, you know, having people who are going to do the teaching in your IET have to really be familiar with contextualized curriculum and how to develop lessons and activities that enable, you know, somebody to learn the math of welding, or learn the language that's needed in a healthcare profession. And they have to be able to be creative in terms of developing things that are really needed in that class. So next slide, please. I want to talk a little bit. Here's another tool that we developed to help instructors kind of map what basic skills or language skills are needed in an occupational training. And it's really just a process. And I also might say that, you know, your training provider has to really be willing to want to do an IET. They have to be willing to let the basic skills or the language instructor have access to their materials, to their syllabus, maybe even before the IET is offered. They have to let them come in and observe their class. I think it's a good idea so that the instructor can, you know, see what the students have to learn in the class and how that instructor teaches. And they have to be able to work together. That's not always the easiest thing to make happen, or it's not always the most natural thing. So there has to be a lot of upfront work. Again, this is another reason why it takes so long. Sit down and map out what is going to be the basic skills component of the curriculum. And this tool just is very simple, common sense, a mapping tool. And the instructor would just try to gather any materials they can gather from the training provider, a syllabus, books, as I said, lessons, and that's not always that easy to get. You know, sometimes it's been our experience that a training provider doesn't always have it all written down. They you know, sometimes have a syllabus, but they might do lesson planning, you know, the day before. So you've got to do your best to figure out what math is in the needed in the curriculum for the occupational skills course, what reading is needed, what writing is required, and what the workforce preparation is needed. And that just takes some time up front to do some research and writing it all down, and then creating your contextualized activities and lessons. Next slide, please. So one of the things is workforce preparation. One thing that we find easy, and you can do the next slide, easy to use to help figure out what to do in your workforce preparation class, is to use this foundation skills framework that was developed. It was actually developed at the Institute for the Study of Adult Literacy at Penn State. Many years ago. It's been updated since, and at the very bottom of this slide is the link to be able to just download this framework. But it's pretty comprehensive in terms of workforce preparation skills. It includes 4 different categories: basic workplace skills, basic workplace knowledge, basic employability, and lifelong learning skills. And then you'll see on this wheel, it identifies different skills within each of those areas. And then you can't see this, but when you actually download it from the Pennsylvania Adult Resources website, each of those skill areas, like applies health and safety concepts, it will have specific indicators related and competencies related to that skill. So you can really use it. You could show it to your employers that you're working with, or you can show it to the training partner and have them help you identify which skills are needed in either the basic skills or language component of the program or in the training component, because both.
Carol, we're not able to hear you right now.
Sorry, everybody, I just lost my connection. Yeah, is that good?
Yep, you sound great. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Figuring out which skills you need to include in the curriculum and who's going to teach them is a really important part of the process. Next slide, please. Caitlin also mentioned as one of the requirements in WIOA is to develop a single set of objectives. And, you know, there's in my experience going around at different trainings, either at COABE or in various states, is there's a lot of confusion on the single set of objectives. And different states may have different requirements. And they do have different requirements on this. I'm sure. In fact, I think that's a really important thing to mention, is that across the board, different states have different requirements on what's going to happen in IETs, and certainly they do with the single set of objectives. Some states may want to see your single set of objectives before they'll give approval on the IET. Other states, you know, don't have as much of an interest in seeing what's happening. But I think a rule of thumb for the single set of objectives, because you're trying to, the goal is to get the training provider and the basic skills instructor to work together to do new instruction so that a target population can succeed in the IET. And that means kind of mapping, as I said, you know, what needs to be in the basic skills component, or the adult, what is the adult education content, what's the workforce prep content and the workforce training content, and identifying the objectives in teaching all of that content that is shared and that aligns. So it's common sense, I think. The objectives have to align. And next slide, please. So you can see on here how a single set of objectives might align. And this is another tool that we have to help instructors, you know, figure out how to develop this single set of objectives. So if you look at the column, I think it's the basic skills, resources, and activities. And the goal is to kind of be able to understand the vocabulary of, you know, pipe measuring. You can see what's the workforce prep activity that helps them do that, and then and use, you know, those terms correctly and understand those terms correctly. And then what's the basic skills content and objectives that they need to be able to do. So they need to list those pipe measurement tools and their definitions and state their uses. They need to understand and use those units of measurement. And then they need to, in the occupational skills or the training course, they need to identify those tools. They need to pick up a tool to be able to measure pipe length. And if you look across the different components of the IET, you can just see how in each example, they're just a little bit different, and they relate to either a basic skills content, a workforce prep activity, or the training content. And then it also is like, where would you get the resources to do this? And then how are you going to determine competency with the basic skills assessment? And then when you pull it all together at the bottom, you can see how the single set of objectives is the objective is to just demonstrate the ability to select the correct tool. So that you would have to know the vocabulary, you would have to know the tool, and then you would have to be able to complete a measurement task. You would have to be able to measure, that would be the math. You'd have to use the tool, that would be a workforce, the ability, that would be the workforce prep activity. And then we just kind of list some of the competencies there. Next slide, please. It's question time. And I guess I say that this is a session that we have kind of compacted from a day-long workshop. And so we went through the information really fast and, tried to choose some of the key highlights of the day-long workshop. But we're happy to answer your questions.
All right, so there's 2 questions here so far. Melissa Perry asks, what is the funding sources through ITA? Can you please talk about funding sources for students who struggle in the crisis of poverty and can't afford the additional requirements for IET?
I can take a stab, and then Kaylin, I want you to help too. So, you can use the federal requirement of WIOA. If you've got funding for from Title II, you can use your Title II monies to fund, the training, the basic skills part, and depending on what your, state allows or your proposal allows, in some places they're allowed to provide some support services. In other places they aren't. But if you're working with a workforce partner, they have some other resources. Maybe you can have them use the ITA for the training portion, and you can keep your adult education resources to do the basic skills or language part and some support services. Maybe your workforce partner has some support services that they can help with, like pay for, the testing. Maybe you're working with an employer and they could contribute some funding for testing. So that's really a partnership issue and part of the planning in terms of funding. Kaylin, can you add some more specifics?
Yeah, I'd say that Carol hit the nail on the head when she said it's really a partner concern. That's why you want to have a team working together while you're developing your IET. I think that, we need to think beyond having Title II pay for it or just our workforce development partners. Depending who the trainer is, they may have some money earmarked for training. For example, in Pennsylvania, we have some community colleges that are providing the training component, and the community college has specific funding set aside for this type of work. You may have a foundation in your community that would be happy to help support the training component. If your employer is the trainer, which is perfectly allowable, if the employer is the trainer, then they would probably be providing the training pro bono, because they'll be wanting to have those people work for them. So I would say be creative about your thinking. And I think that I would not let that deter me. I think that goes on the pile of things that we really need to think hard about. But again, the responsibility of identifying the funding use your partners to help with that, because there may be money available that you hadn't even considered. Do we have another question?
Yes, Jane asks, how long should an IET class last?
Well, it really depends on what the class is. I think that's a really hard one to answer. You know, in my experience, folks are choosing like shorter occupational trainings to, you know, that relate to the jobs. So, you know, it really depends on the training. It depends on how many hours a week, you know, you have the training. I think this is a point that we didn't say earlier, which we probably should have said. The IET, you know, the concept of simultaneous instruction between the basic skills and the language skills means that your basic skills portion is going on while your occupational skills is going on. So they start and they end at the same time. That doesn't mean that they have the same many hours, but they're supposed to be going on the same number of weeks. So that's a really important thing to mention. But it really, really depends on what the training is, how long it needs to be. Caitlin, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, so as Carol said, if it's an 8-week training, if you're doing welding training and it's an 8 or a 16-week training, that means your adult basic education component and workforce preparation also has to go from day 1 until the final day. So I think it's important to take that into consideration, particularly if you're looking at trainings that are longer, because your adult basic ed has to go the full cycle. So if you're looking at a training that might be a year long, you know, after 6 months or so, your students may be really up to speed with their adult basic ed and have caught up and are understanding the material. That doesn't mean you can quit. So you have to keep going with that class. So I think, you know, it's something else to consider in the planning stages. Just because it sounds like a good idea, consider that, you know, you're going to be teaching that reading, writing, and math and supporting that training throughout the training. So if it's a long training, your adult basic ed has to go that long. And I'm using that as an example because my experience showed me, or brought up an example of a training that was going to be a year long, and about halfway through, or not even halfway through, the students who were at a higher level to begin with really didn't need the support of the adult education anymore. So it turned out that, you know, that they were coming to class and really had nothing to do because they were doing quite well in the training. So just because, you know, IET sounds like a good idea, in that case, maybe a bridge program would have suited the needs of the program, where you would have given those students a little refresher before they started the training, rather than trying to make it a simultaneous integrated education training program. And either one of those are good interventions. It's just, you know, a bridge program is just not IET. So, you know, there are lots of things to consider, as Carol has said. Any other questions? Oh, I'm sorry, Carol, did you have more to say?
No, I mean, I'll just add to that. It's a really good example that you just gave, Kaylin, of, you know, the IET might not always be the best intervention for getting your students ready for a job. So that, you know, just wanted to underscore that.
All right, I don't see any other questions here. I don't know if there is anything else. Oh, sorry, one more just came in. Are there any assessment instruments available to measure outcomes, participants' perceptions, student success?
I mean, I think most programs have their own maybe class survey. On a larger scale, I don't know of anything. You know, we have our own satisfaction you know, survey that we give our students for our adult education programs. I know that there's the federal government, they're considering, you know, doing a national evaluation and possibly using IETs as the, you know, one of the areas that they study. But I personally don't know anything specifically. Kaylin, do you?
No, I do not.
It's a great question. And there's more questions.
Let's see, somebody else, Janice said the CASAS e-test can be used.
Can Janice type out what that acronym stands for?
CASAS. I think she's talking about the CASAS test. Yeah.
Oh.
So in an IET, the adult basic ed component is a regular adult basic ed class. So you would pre-test and post-test your students to measure educational gains, because, you know, they're reported as adult education students with the earmark of IET. So you're looking for the same kinds of advancements that you would be in any kind of community-based class that you're also offering to your students.
Well, that's great if people, yeah, I didn't quite hear what the acronym was, CASAS. That's great if people are saying things that they know of.
Okay, another question. If IET may not be the best way to get students ready for the job market, why is it mandatory to have it?
I don't know that, well.
So I'm not going to interpret the law, but IET is mandatory only with IELCE programs. So your state may require you to do it, but that's your state's call. So for example, in Pennsylvania, our IELCE programs, the integrated English, literacy, and civics education classes are required by WIOA to have an IET component. But our other state and federally funded programs are not required. It's an option in Pennsylvania. But I do know that there are other states that it is not an option, that it is expected as a grant holder. So that's something that, you know, as a state, comes down from your state.
And I see in the comments that Gloria wrote a really great comment about the evaluation. It's the occupational training program will use whatever assessments are normally used as part of the course, including college issued or industry based credential attainments. I mean, you also, you know, might, you know, identify competencies that you test at the end of a course to evaluate the outcomes. And then, I mean, I would add to what Kaylin said about it's IET is a really great strategy when it's the right thing to do. And I think, you know, I'm not sure why it became mandatory, but it's a great strategy. So yeah, it just needs to be well planned and done at the right time.
All right, some more questions here. Is there a recognized list of credentials that will be recognized by NRS?
That's a question that Octay has to answer, I think.
All right, next question. Do you have a good reference for developing bridge programming? Is there a formal definition of bridge like there is for IET?
You know, I'm sure there's resources that are available on developing bridge programs, but not one specifically is coming to the, coming to mind. Kaylin, do you
No,
know?
I would say,
There's a lot of stuff done in the Accelerating Opportunities Initiative. JFF has a lot of resources. Jobs for the Future has a lot of resources that are on their website. I would look there. Kaylin, I interrupted you, sorry.
yeah, I would say there's not like a clearinghouse for information. And as far as the definition of bridge, I think that varies. I think that there have been times where people are using bridge and IET as synonyms where they are not, in my opinion. So again, to me, a bridge is exactly what it is. It's a bridge from adult education to training, whereas IET is concurrent. It's simultaneous. It's not one and then the other. Whereas a bridge program, in my opinion, again, is sequential rather than simultaneous. So, with IET, people are co-enrolled in the training program and the adult education program, and it occurs continuously from the first day to the last day. Whereas a bridge, again, it doesn't mean it's not the right thing to do. It may occur for the first 6 months or first 6 weeks, and then students are caught up, and that's bridging them to the training as well.
All right, another question. What are some successful IET fields / trainings that you have used?
I'm personally not, each IET has, in my opinion, has to be developed specifically for that training. So,
so if you're looking at occupations, if that what the question is asking, people are doing trainings around welding, they're doing trainings around entrepreneurship, they're doing trainings around CNAs, they're doing trainings around phlebotomy technicians, they're doing trainings around IET certifications. So there are, a multitude of jobs. So I think that, you want to, again, look at your local labor market information, sit down with somebody from your One Stop or your Workforce Development Board and have them tell you the jobs that are available. So it's not, just picking something that you think is a good idea. It's picking something that makes sense for your community and the students that you're serving, and, to some extent, the employers in the community. So there, are a wide range of those occupations that have been associated with IET. But I think that, sit down and use the process that we've described here briefly to really establish what's the best way to do it. What's the best way to choose that occupation or that sector.
I think the other thing, like the state of Washington is like most known for, their work and with the IBEST model. And I don't know to the extent that they share their materials. And I also think that initially when the IBEST model was initiated, the state of Washington had a very different situation than most adult education providers across the country, because the whole state was invested in developing IETs, and from the top down to the community college system, they were given support and funding to work in community colleges to develop IETs in training courses in the community colleges. I mean, I would hope that they have developed some good materials through all of that work. But as IETs kind of morphed and evolved, you know, I think what Kaylin said is, and what we've been trying to emphasize in our training, you know, by and large, it is, you know, working with your partners to develop the IET that is kind of customized for the target population and students you're working with.
Okay, let's see. I think we're just about out of time here. There are some more questions, but I can email those to you, and you can answer them through email if you'd like. I know Robert would like to just say another word here, and before you leave, we do have a poll that I'll put up on the screen. If you could please just answer I think it's one question before you leave, that'd be great. Thank you. All right, Robert.
Yes, hello everyone, and thank you again so much to our Pennsylvania friends, Carol and Kaylin. That was just one of the best comprehensive, and in less than an hour. So that was really powerful information. I love the Q&A. And again, thanks to all our friends at COABE, the COABE board, and Sharon, Bonnie, and everyone, and Lindsay for you know, working so hard to put these on, and we're super thrilled to sponsor them. And again, before I turn it back over to Lindsay, for those of you who might be new to Burlington English, just to share with you, Burlington English is really truly a comprehensive program, all the way from taking first steps for ESL, adult ESL learners with technology in a true foundations basics program, what we've been familiar with for quite some time with life skills and workplace readiness emphasis, and our English in America fits so nicely when, as the ladies were talking about, you couple IET with the IELCE for the 243. And then again, as you're readying your learners, you can even incorporate for transition beyond ESL into next steps. We have our everyday English, including the very, very well liked and used advanced English. And of course, it's really all steps forward with, begin with the end in mind. And if the end is an IET, then let's get learners as early as possible thinking about those career exploration and soft skills that are going to ready them for not just job acquisition and retention, but also again entering into the making a correct choice for them for this IET. And again, that virtual job shadowing is done in our more than 45 careers that are available in our career extension modules. Of course, for pleasure reading and building, you know, that acquisition of English, not just in the classroom, but away and even through pleasure, digital library. And that's all again done even through our vocabulary practice and mobile and speech trainer that's available for all smart devices. And then a big shout out to our friends at CASAS. Just got through. Hi Linda. Great presentation at Florida's state conference this week. And if you haven't seen what's new with CASAS, so there, what's new on their website, it's very much worth checking out. And then lastly, again, to wrap up, for those, again, learning, you know, new to finding out more about Burlington English, what really sets us apart is, you know, projectable lessons, everything teachers would need for the classroom, along with worksheets, and everything seamlessly fit together for a true blended experience with independent learning, and then again at a distance. So with that, thank you. If you'd like to find out more, we'll see you at burlingtonenglish.com. And now I'll hand it back over to Lindsay. Thanks again for joining in.
Great, thank you, Robert, and thank you, Carol and Kaylin, for your wonderful presentation. I went ahead and shared the poll, so if you can please take a moment, let us know your thoughts. That would be great. We would definitely appreciate that. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today.